Hello, today I'm going to be discussing the case of Karen Ann Quinlan, which made the country question if people have a right to die with dignity in the United States. This ethical dilemma of Karen Ann Quinlan caused a controversial debate that has forever made an impact on patients' right to die and the idea of preserving life. To provide some background on who Karen Ann Quinlan is, she was born on March 29, 1954, and was then adopted as an infant by the Quinlan family. She was raised in a religious middle-class home in the suburbs of New Jersey. In high school, Karen received average grades and was quite popular. However, after she graduated, she withdrew from old friends and was drifting from job to job. It was apparent that she had moved into a crowd of drugs and drinking. On the night of April 14, 1975, Karen went out with some friends for a birthday party to a bar. It was seen that she had consumed Valium along with alcoholic beverages, all while on a crash diet. It is said that adding these two substances together can cause memory loss and loss of consciousness. Karen had requested to be driven home early from the bar because she was feeling quite dizzy. Karen had then stopped breathing for at least two 15-minute periods, and her friends had attempted to resuscitate her. She was then rushed to the hospital, but with the interruptions in breathing, her brain was deprived of oxygen, which resulted her falling into a coma. Getting medical intervention helped save her life, but she was never able to regain consciousness. She was unable to breathe on her own, and so she was put on a respirator, and her condition deteriorated over the next few months. Karen was transferred to an intensive care unit, and she was constantly getting tests done as to why she was in a coma. However, the doctors had soon discovered that the neurological damage was responsible for her inability to do necessary bodily functions like breathing and emptying her bladder without mechanical help. Doctors had noted that she had suffered irreversible brain damage in which she had no cognitive or cerebral functioning, and there was no chance of her coming out of her vegetative state. On July 31, 1975, the Quinlans requested Karen to be taken off of life support due to her irreversible vegetative state. The doctors in care refused to do so because they feared a malpractice suit, despite the Quinlans signing a statement which gave the doctors permission and removed the doctors and hospital from the liability of her death. This is when Karen Ann Quinlan's case had become the center of a national debate on whether the family had a right to allow their daughter to die versus the hospital's responsibility to preserve her life. Additionally, there were now also problems defining death in this case because there were new elements to consider when defining death by being more than just a heartbeat. Part of the debate was considering how cognitive brain functioning affected the definition of death, and in Karen's case, it was quite conflicting. After the doctors caring for Karen Ann Quinlan refused her parents' request to let her die, they had taken the case to court. On September 12, 1975, the Quinlans requested that their daughter Karen's respirator be disconnected and that their daughter be allowed to die with grace and dignity because there was no hope of her recovering. One of the doctors testifying in the case went into detail into how the brain functions at two different levels, which are an internal vegetative regulation, such as breathing, heart rate, sleeping, etc., and a higher brain, which is the cognitive or thinking part of the brain. It was argued that although Karen would not return to cognitive functioning, her vegetative part continued to operate with the help of mechanical aid. However, Karen had passed some of the tests to evaluate if she was brain dead, and so the judge ruled that Karen was medically and legally alive, and so disconnecting the respirator would be an act of euthanasia. This Superior Court judge in New Jersey denied the request in November of 1975. 7 days after the judge denied their petition, this ruling was reversed when the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed to hear the appeal to the previous judge's decision and so the Supreme Court surpassed it. The Supreme Court set legal and medical precedents in its decision on March 31st, 1976, in which the court found a new interpretation to the right of privacy, in which Miss Quinlan's state of no reasonable possibility of recovery exceeds the state's interest in preserving life, as her parents wanted her life support systems disconnected. The state decided not to appeal the New Jersey Supreme Court ruling. The court ruled her father was an authority for deciding her fate on her behalf as she was in a coma, and that no one would be held criminally liable for removing her life support systems because her death would not be homicide, but rather expiration from existing natural causes. The Quinlan's lawyer, Paul W. Armstrong, said that keeping Miss Quinlan alive after the dignity, beauty, promise, and meaning of earthly life have vanished was cruel and forceful. On March 16, 1976, Karen was weaned off the respirator at St. Clair's Hospital in Denville. However, she continued to breathe on her own. On June 9, 1976, Karen was moved from St. Clair's Hospital to the Morrisview Nursing Home. Then a year later, her condition worsened as she was reported to be near death, but over the course of a few days, she then improved. On June 11, 1985, 10 years after falling into the coma, Karen Ann Quinlan passed away from pneumonia. With the whole country looking at this case in which a young woman who had fallen into a coma with no chance of coming out of her vegetative state, and she was not given the right to die, it had definitely sparked a national debate. This case promoted an idea of being brain dead as the legal term of death in some states and laws across the country started recognizing the right to die and living wills. The new criteria of being brain dead included various tests that had to be met in order to satisfy the definition of brain death through very low levels of neurological responses. These tests included unresponsive to stimuli, no spontaneous movement or breathing, not responding to reflexes, and having no brainwave activity. A huge impact of the Karen Ann Quinlan case was the adoption of bioethics in hospitals, in which there were now ethical committees put in place to evaluate ethical dilemmas in medicine and how the best decision could be made. Overall, the case of Karen Ann Quinlan made the nation question the right to die with dignity through the preservation of life that was enforced by law.